last week on Legally Kidnapped.
Good evening. Our top story this week. In Ohio, judges are sick of dealing with the unnecessary child removal hearings and want to leave the decisions up to social workers. In New Hampshire, the government cuts off funding to provide legal defense to parents whose kids are snatched by the child protective industry, making it easier for CPS agents to win such cases, with the state attorney general comparing it to shooting fish in a barrel. In Arizona, kids are still leaving the state's foster care system at age 18 with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And the U.S. Supreme Court is considering whether or not juveniles should be able to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Oregon this week, a Native American tribe takes control of their own child welfare system from the state. In California, a judge rules that San Francisco can't ban the Happy Meal toy. Several California lawmakers try to address the growing problem of children of deported immigrant parents who end up in the foster care system. And the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency reports that in the first 6 months of 2011, the agency deported 46,686 immigrants that had at least one child in the U.S. citizen, estimating that this policy will ultimately bring another 15,000 kids into the foster care system over the next 5 years. In Nebraska, the lawmakers are trying to put back the pieces of their broken foster care system after the state's failed privatization attempts. The Nebraska legislature approves $2.5 million to reimburse the child welfare subcontractors that they were using, and the governor vetoes it. But the legislature overrides that veto, and the Nebraska child protective industry issues a warning about a fraudulent scam where people are calling in soliciting donations in the name of state's Department of Health and Human Services. In New Jersey this week, CPS agents are upset over a lack of protection from violent attacks from pissed-off parents. In Colorado, the state isn't providing enough funds to help former foster kids become independent and self-sufficient. Colorado bans the use of dangerous face-down-on-the-ground restraint methods in all of their state-run facilities after a kid dies. And a mistaken allegation of child abuse leads to the parent's murder-suicide before a rare genetic disorder that was misconstrued as child abuse was found in the baby. In China this week, 5 people, including a doctor, are under arrest after a teenager sells one of his kidneys for enough money to buy an iPad and an iPhone. In the Czech Republic, orphanages are frequently sedating kids with behavior problems rather than offering them any psychological help. In India, it comes to light that 1,800 kids have gone missing from shelters and orphanages in the last 4 years, and an orphanage worker from India is arrested on suspicion of raping young girls in his care. In Nepal, the government is neglecting to provide funds and services to kids who are HIV positive. In Russia, social entrepreneurs are attempting to reform Soviet-era orphanages, claiming that they are causing social problems. And in Syria, 3 minor girls get raped by a staff member in a children's home. In Australia, the government of Victoria pledges $50 million to Gippsland, which is identified as having the highest proportion of young people admitted to state care. And the South Australian government will issue a formal apology to the victims of forced adoption. In England this week, a doctor who intentionally misdiagnosed parents with mental disorders so that British social workers could snatch their kids away faces being struck off by the General Medical Council. The British Secretary of Education is being accused of exaggerating the race role in adoption delays, while Ofsted puts the blame on court delays. A British social worker gets 9 years in jail for putting his own stepchildren through a decade of child abuse. And a British mother says that she'll never help out again after her son's play turned into a politically correct, anti-abuse background-checking, form-filling, dirt-digging fiasco. British social workers judge that kids who are brought up in the British foster care system are unfit to raise their own children. The Queen doesn't want the wife of Prince William to adopt a child before producing a biological heir to the throne. The number of pregnant women fleeing England to escape British social workers in hopes of a chance to raise their own kids is on the rise these days. But the British child protective industry fights back and sends social workers into France to snatch a targeted newborn from the parents who moved there. In entertainment news this week, Levi Johnson tries to cash in on the exclusive interview to the highest bidder regarding his on-the-way baby with his new girlfriend. Star from the TV show Law & Order SVU is upset over a failed adoption of a newborn after the real mother changes her mind. And in sports, former boxing champ Hector Macho Camacho has been charged with child abuse after an altercation with his son at his ex-wife's house last year. In Minnesota, an adoptive mother is sentenced to time served after spending 3 years in jail and the death of a 5-year-old. In Rhode Island, a couple including former foster kid is held without bail on murder charges. In Texas, a judge decides that a boy who was kidnapped 8 years ago by his babysitter will finally be returned to his real mother after a stay in foster care. And in Colorado, daycare providers rat out a mom to the child protective industry after mistaking a birthmark for child abuse. In Florida, Deltona Oklahoma leaders are criticizing foster homes after 3 teenage girls are arrested in a murder plot against their foster mother. In Missouri, the investigation continues into a homeless woman who was booted out of the hospital after giving birth so CPS agents could snatch her kid. In Nebraska, a new law prevents a pregnant woman from having an abortion where her water broke when she was 23 weeks pregnant, forcing her to wait to have a miscarriage instead. And in New York, the son of Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy is off the hook after CPS agents find no evidence of abuse in the case where he tried to take his kid from the hospital against the wishes of hostile nurses. In Oklahoma this week, a former CPS agent gets $244,694 after she was fired based on the results of a slipshod internal investigation. A federal judge clears the way for a former mayor and others to be sued in a housing discrimination case after a raid on an apartment complex housing foster kids. In Pennsylvania, a lawsuit heads to trial after the child protective industry placed a sexually violent teenager in a foster home with no warning about his past, who then raped the foster parent's biological 9-year-old repeatedly. In Texas, a 17-year-old is in jail for distracting police while a mom flees out the window during a child abuse investigation. And finally, tonight in California, a DA locks up a 17-year-old girl who was a victim of sexual assault to ensure that she is there to testify against her abuser. For these stories and all the latest dirt on the child protective industry, visit www.legallykidnapped.com. And until next week, this is Baby LK. Over and out.